The blood-red sunset cast long shadows over the dusty main street of Willow Creek as Sarah Wilson stumbled forward, the whispers following her like a swarm of angry hornets. Her wedding ring was gone, her promises broken, and in a town where a woman's word was supposed to be as binding as a man's contract, she had become an outcast overnight. Sarah clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she passed the general store. Mrs. Peterson, who had once greeted her with warm smiles, now turned her back, ushering her young daughter inside as if Sarah carried something contagious. The shame burned hotter than the Arizona summer of 1878, scorching her from the inside out. "Adulteress," someone hissed from the shadows. "Oath breaker," another voice followed. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the dirt road ahead. 6 months ago, she had been the town's darling bride, married to Thomas Wilson, the banker's son. Now, at 22, she was a woman condemned, her reputation in tatters. Not because she had given her heart to another man, no. The truth was far more complicated, but because she had fled her husband's home in the dead of night, breaking the vows that were supposed to bind her to him until death. Only she knew what those vows had truly cost her. The bruises hidden beneath her high-necked dresses told a different story than the one that circulated through town. As Sarah rounded the corner toward the boarding house where she had taken a small room, she noticed a tall figure leaning against the hitching post. Dust-covered boots, worn leather chaps, a weather-beaten hat tipped low over his eyes. Daniel Dawson, the quiet cowboy who had arrived in Willow Creek 3 months ago to work at the Stewart Ranch on the outskirts of town. Sarah lowered her gaze, preparing for another barb, another judgment. But Daniel merely straightened, touched the brim of his hat respectfully, and said nothing. His silence wasn't charged with accusations like everyone else's. It just was as steady and undemanding as the man himself. She hurried past him up the steps to the boarding house, feeling his eyes on her back, but hearing no condemning words follow her. It was the same each day, a silent acknowledgement that somehow felt more like respect than the pity or disgust she received from others. Inside her sparse room, Sarah sank onto the narrow bed. The boarding house was the only place that would take her in, and only because Mrs. Gardner, the elderly widow who ran it, believed everyone deserved a roof over their head, regardless of their sins. Sarah stared at her hands, the pale band of skin where her wedding ring had once rested now almost faded. She had pawned the ring in the next town over to pay for her room and board. A knock at the door startled her. Sarah tensed. Thomas had come looking for her twice already, his charming public face replaced by cold fury when they were alone. "Who is it?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's Mrs. Gardner, dear. You have a visitor." Sarah opened the door cautiously to find the landlady's kind, wrinkled face looking apologetic. "It's that cowboy from the Stewart place. Says he has something for you. I can send him away if you'd prefer." Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. "No, it's all right. I'll come down." In the small sitting room downstairs, Daniel Dawson stood awkwardly, his hat in his hands. At 30, his face was tanned and weathered from years under the open sky, but his eyes were clear and direct. Unlike most men in town, he looked at her face when he spoke to her, not at the floor or with the leering glances that suggested she was now considered fair game. "Miss Wilson," he said with a slight nod. "Mr. Dawson," she replied, keeping her distance. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Found this on the trail coming into town. Thought it might be yours." Sarah cautiously accepted the package and unwrapped it. Inside was her mother's silver locket, the one Thomas had ripped from her neck the night she fled, the one she thought was lost forever. "Where did you?" She couldn't finish the question, her throat too tight with emotion. "Like I said, on the trail." His eyes told a different story, but he didn't elaborate. "Clasp is broken, but Smith over at the livery is good with small repairs, could fix it for you." Sarah closed her fingers around the locket. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson." He nodded again, replaced his hat, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "Miss Wilson?" Yes, Stuart needs help at the ranch house, cooking, cleaning. His wife's gone back east to care for her sick mother, pays fair, thought you might want to know. With that, he was gone, leaving Sarah staring after him, the locket warm in her palm and the first glimmer of possibility she'd felt in months taking root in her heart. The next morning, Sarah rose before dawn, packed her meager belongings, and settled her account with Mrs. Gardner. The old woman squeezed her hand. "The Stuart Ranch is good people," she said. "Not everyone believes what they hear, dear." The walk to the Stuart Ranch was long, nearly 5 miles outside town. Sarah had left early to avoid as many prying eyes as possible, but the sun was already climbing high by the time the ranch house came into view. It was a substantial building, not fancy but solid, with a broad porch and sturdy corrals nearby. As she approached, Sarah saw Daniel by the barn mending a saddle. He looked up at her approach, and though his expression remained impassive, she thought she detected a flicker of something like approval in his eyes. "Mr. Stuart's in the house," he said by way of greeting. Robert Stuart proved to be a gruff but fair man in his 50s with a lined face and silver-streaked hair. He asked few questions, stated the wages, outlined her duties, and showed her to a small but clean room off the kitchen. "My wife will be gone at least through winter," he explained. "Need someone to keep house, cook for the men, help with the accounts. Can you cipher?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "I was a schoolteacher before I was married." He nodded, seeming pleased. "That'll be useful. 5 ranch hands to feed, including Dawson. Sundays you can have to yourself." And just like that, Sarah had a new position and a chance to rebuild her life away from the judgmental eyes of Willow Creek. The first weeks at the Stuart Ranch passed in a blur of hard work. Sarah rose before the men to prepare breakfast, spent her days cleaning, mending, and helping Mr. Stuart with the ranch accounts, then prepared dinner for the hungry crew. The work was exhausting but honest, and for the first time since fleeing her husband's home, she slept soundly at night. The ranch hands were initially cautious around her, clearly having heard the rumors, but they were respectful. Most kept their distance except at mealtimes, when they wolfed down her cooking with appreciative grunts. Daniel was different. He rarely spoke, but he was often nearby fixing a loose porch rail outside the kitchen window, bringing in firewood before she had to ask, carrying water for her on laundry days. He never mentioned her past or asked questions, just offered quiet assistance that Sarah came to rely upon. One evening, as autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Sarah was returning from the henhouse with a basket of eggs when she heard raised voices from the main road. She froze, recognizing one immediately, Thomas. "She's my wife, Stuart. I have every legal right to take her home." "Don't see how that's my concern, Wilson," came Mr. Stuart's steady reply. "I hired a housekeeper. Her personal affairs are her business. That woman broke her marriage vows and fled like a thief in the night. The whole town knows it." Sarah's hands trembled so badly that one of the eggs slipped from the basket and broke on the ground. She didn't realize Daniel was behind her until his hand gently steadied the basket. "Go inside," he said quietly. "Use the back door. I'll handle this." Sarah hesitated, shame and fear battling within her. "I should inside, Miss Wilson." His voice was gentle but firm. "Please." She did as he asked, slipping into the kitchen through the back door, but she remained near the window, listening. Daniel's boots crunched on the gravel as he approached the confrontation. "Everything all right, Mr. Stuart? Wilson here seems to think we're harboring his runaway wife," Stuart replied dryly. "That's so." Daniel's voice remained casual, but Sarah heard the underlying steel. "This isn't your concern, Cowboy," Thomas snapped. "This is between me and my wayward wife. Thing is," Daniel drawled, "Miss Wilson works here now, and we look after our own at the Stuart Ranch. She's not yours to look after." "She's might want to reconsider your next words," Daniel interrupted, his voice dropping lower. "Especially if you're about to say she's your property." There was a tense silence, and Sarah held her breath. "You don't know what you're getting involved in," Thomas finally said, his tone venomous. That woman isn't worth protecting. Ask anyone in town. Don't much care for town gossip, Daniel replied evenly. Now, unless you have ranch business with Mr. Stewart, I suggest you head back to Willow Creek. This isn't over, Thomas warned, but Sarah heard the sound of a horse being turned, hooves receding down the road. When Daniel entered the kitchen a few minutes later, he found Sarah white-faced at the table, the basket of eggs forgotten beside her. He's gone, Daniel said simply, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Sarah stared at her hands. You shouldn't have done that. He'll make trouble for you now. Daniel shrugged. Not my first bit of trouble, won't be my last. You don't even know me, Sarah said, finally looking up at him. Why would you stand against the entire town for a woman you barely know? Daniel considered her for a long moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. Reckon I know enough. And what is it you think you know, Mr. Dawson? He sipped his coffee, then set the cup down carefully. I know I've seen men like Thomas Wilson before, men who wear one face in public and another in private. He paused. I know I've seen the way you flinch when someone moves too quickly near you, and I know those weren't just everyday bruises you were hiding when you first came to town. Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely relieved. The town believes I was unfaithful. The town believes what's convenient, Daniel replied. Easier to blame a woman for breaking vows than to admit one of their upstanding men might be something other than what he claims. Why don't you believe it? You don't know me. Daniel's eyes met hers steadily. I make my own judgments, Miss Wilson. As he turned to leave, Sarah found her voice again. Sarah, she said quietly, my name is Sarah. He paused at the door, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Sarah, he repeated, and then he was gone, leaving her with the strange sense that something fundamental had shifted between them. The confrontation with Thomas seemed to have broken some invisible barrier. In the days that followed, Daniel began taking his meals at the table rather than hurrying back to work, sometimes lingering over coffee to talk with Sarah after the other men had left. Their conversations started cautiously safe topics like the weather or ranch matters, but gradually deepened. She learned he was from Texas originally, had fought briefly in the war as a very young man, then drifted west, working ranches from the Rio Grande to Montana. He'd never settled anywhere for long, but had been at the Stewart Ranch longer than most places. In turn, she told him about growing up in Ohio, coming west with her parents who had both died of fever 3 years earlier, her brief time teaching at the Willow Creek school before Thomas had courted her with pretty words and promises. She didn't speak of her marriage, and Daniel didn't ask, though sometimes when their conversations lulled, she would catch him watching her with questions in his eyes. As October gave way to November, the ranch settled into preparations for winter. Sarah found herself looking forward to the evenings when Daniel would join her in the kitchen after dinner, sometimes helping with the dishes, sometimes just sitting companionably as she worked on mending or accounts. One such evening, as the first snow of the season dusted the ground outside, Sarah was at the table reviewing the ledgers when Daniel entered with an armload of firewood. After stacking it neatly by the stove, he lingered, watching her work. You're good with those numbers, he observed. Sarah smiled slightly, pleased by the simple compliment. I always liked arithmetic. It makes sense, everything balances in the end if you do it right. Not much in life works that way, Daniel said, taking a seat across from her. No, she agreed, setting down her pencil. It doesn't. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out something small that glinted in the lamplight. Got this back from Smith today, he said, sliding her mother's locket across the table. Clasp is fixed. Sarah picked up the silver pendant, running her thumb over the delicate engraving. You didn't have to do that. Wanted to. Sarah opened the locket to reveal the tiny portraits inside her mother and father on their wedding day. It's the only thing I have left of them, she said softly. When Thomas tore it off, I thought it was lost forever. Daniel's jaw tightened at the mention of Thomas, but he said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "He was so charming when he courted me," Sarah said, the words coming almost against her will. Everyone thought I was so fortunate, catching the eye of Thomas Wilson. His family had money, position in town. My parents were gone and I was alone. It seemed like providence. She closed the locket, clutching it tightly. The first time he hit me was 3 weeks after the wedding. I burned his toast at breakfast. She gave a bitter laugh. Such a small thing, I thought it was an aberration, that he was just having a bad day, but it happened again. And again. Each time he would apologize, bring me gifts, promise it would never happen again. Daniel remained silent, his eyes never leaving her face, but his hands had clenched into fists on the table. When I finally decided to leave, he caught me packing. That was the worst beating yet. I managed to get away when he went to the bank the next morning, but I could only take what I could carry. She touched her neck where the locket would hang. He ripped this off before I could grab it. Said I didn't deserve to keep it, that my parents would be ashamed of me for being such a disobedient wife. He was wrong, Daniel said quietly. The town doesn't think so. To them, I broke sacred vows. Vows go both ways, Daniel countered. He promised to cherish and protect you. He broke his vows with the first blow. Sarah looked up, meeting his gaze. That's a surprisingly progressive view, Mr. Dawson. Daniel, he corrected gently. And it's not progressive, it's just decent. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she attempted to fasten the locket around her neck. Daniel rose and came around the table. "May I?" he asked. She nodded, turning slightly so he could reach the clasp. His fingers were calloused but deft as they secured the necklace, brushing lightly against the nape of her neck. Sarah was acutely aware of his presence behind her, the clean scent of soap and leather, the careful way he kept his touch impersonal despite the intimacy of the moment. "Thank you," she said when he stepped back. "Not just for the locket, but for listening, for believing me when no one else would." Daniel nodded, his expression serious. "You're stronger than you know, Sarah Wilson. Don't let anyone tell you different." As November deepened toward December, the ranch grew quieter. 2 of the hands left for the winter, seeking work in warmer climates. Mr. Stewart, Daniel, and the remaining 2 cowboys, brothers named Hank and Joe Miller, kept the ranch running with reduced operations. Sarah found herself enjoying the cozier atmosphere. The smaller group meant more relaxed mealtimes, with actual conversation instead of just the businesslike exchange of information. Even Mr. Stewart unbent somewhat, occasionally sharing stories of his younger days or news from his wife's letters. The snowfall grew heavier, sometimes keeping them all housebound for days. During one such storm, after Mr. Stewart had retired early and the Miller brothers were playing cards in the bunkhouse, Sarah taught Daniel to play chess using a set Mr. Stewart kept in the parlor. "My father taught me," she explained, setting up the pieces. "He said it builds character and foresight." Daniel picked up a knight, examining the carved horse head. "My pa taught me to ride and rope, said that was all the character a man needed." Sarah smiled, charmed by this small glimpse into his past. "And was he right?" "Partly," Daniel admitted, placing the knight on the board. "But I reckon there's more to life than just what a man can do with his hands." As she taught him the movements of each piece, Sarah was surprised by how quickly Daniel grasped the strategy of the game. By their third match, he was giving her a genuine challenge, his face a study in concentration as he considered each move. "You're a natural," she remarked after he executed a particularly clever maneuver. He smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his usually solemn face. "Got a good teacher." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. Sarah had been careful to keep a proper distance between them despite their growing friendship. She was still legally married, still carrying the weight of her broken vows, whether justified or not. And Daniel had never expressed any interest beyond friendship and protective concern. Yet sitting across from him in the lamplight, watching his strong hands move the delicate chess pieces, Sarah felt something stir within her that she had thought dead, a flicker of attraction, of possibility. Daniel looked up, catching her gaze, and for a moment, Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that their relationship had shifted into uncharted territory. Then he deliberately returned his attention to the board, moving his bishop to take her pawn. "Your move," he said quietly. Christmas approached, bringing with it a brief thaw and clearer trails. Mr. Stewart announced he would be traveling to the next county to visit friends for the holiday, leaving Daniel in charge of the ranch. "Miller boys are heading home to their ma's place for Christmas too," he informed Sarah the morning of his departure. "It'll just be you and Dawson holding down the fort for 3 days. That going to be a problem?" His tone was matter-of-fact, but Sarah understood the unspoken question. Was she comfortable being alone with Daniel? "No, sir," she answered honestly. "No problem at all," Stewart nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good, Dawson's a steady man, best hand I've had in years." He paused, studying her face. "You've done good work here too, Sarah. Whatever came before, you've proven yourself at the Stewart Ranch." Coming from the taciturn rancher, it was high praise indeed. Sarah felt her eyes mist unexpectedly. "Thank you, Mr. Stewart." He nodded briskly, embarrassed by the sentiment. "Back day after Christmas. Try not to let the place burn down while I'm gone." After the Miller brothers and Mr. Stewart had departed, an unusual quiet settled over the ranch. Sarah went about her chores, acutely aware that for the first time she and Daniel were truly alone. It wasn't improper, she was an employee after all, and the ranch was hardly an intimate setting, but there was a new awareness between them that made even mundane interactions feel charged with significance. Daniel spent most of the day tending to essential ranch work, coming in only for meals. At dinner, they ate in silence until Sarah finally spoke. "It's strange, isn't it, having the place to ourselves?" Daniel nodded. "Quiet," he agreed. "Too quiet, maybe," Sarah ventured. "I was thinking of baking some Christmas cookies tomorrow. My mother always made them this time of year." "Never had much in the way of Christmas traditions myself," Daniel admitted. "Moved around too much." "Never?" Sarah asked, surprised. Even as a child, a shadow crossed his face. "My mother died when I was young. Pa wasn't one for celebrations." Sarah's heart ached for the boy he must have been. "Then it's decided. Tomorrow we'll have a proper Christmas Eve, even if it's just the two of us. Cookies, decorations, the works." Daniel looked doubtful. "Don't need to go to any trouble on my account." "It's not trouble," Sarah insisted. "It's Christmas." The next day, Sarah threw herself into creating a festive atmosphere. She baked gingerbread and sugar cookies, using precious spices from Mr. Stewart's pantry. She found pine boughs to decorate the mantel and crafted simple ornaments from scraps of colored paper and ribbon. Daniel returned from his morning chores to find the ranch house transformed. He stood in the doorway, snow melting from his boots, staring at the changes with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. "Too much?" she asked uncertainly. He shook his head slowly. "No, it's nice, real nice." Encouraged, Sarah handed him a mug of hot cider. "There's more to do if you'd like to help. I was hoping to find a small tree we could bring in." To her delight, Daniel not only found a perfect little pine, but spent the afternoon helping her decorate it with her handmade ornaments and strings of dried berries. As they worked, the initial awkwardness between them melted away, replaced by an easy companionship punctuated by moments of shared laughter. As evening approached, Sarah prepared a special dinner roast chicken with all the trimmings, followed by an apple pie that filled the house with cinnamon-scented warmth. "I haven't eaten this well since." "Well, I can't remember when," Daniel confessed as they finished the meal. "Then my Christmas mission is accomplished," Sarah said with a smile, pleased by his appreciation. After dinner, they sat by the fire in the parlor. Sarah had found some of Mrs. Stewart's mending and worked on it while Daniel whittled a piece of pine wood, his knife moving in sure, practiced strokes. "What are you making?" Sarah asked, curious. Daniel hesitated, then held up the small carving. It was a delicate horse, simple but beautifully proportioned with flowing mane and tail. "It's lovely," Sarah said, genuinely impressed. "I had no idea you were an artist." Daniel shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. Just something to keep my hands busy in the evenings. May I? Sarah held out her hand and he passed her the carving. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood, admiring the details. You've captured the spirit of it, the movement. It's for you, Daniel said suddenly. For Christmas. Sarah looked up, surprised. For me, but I don't have anything for you. You've given plenty, he said quietly. This day. The meal making the place feel like… He trailed off, like home. Sarah suggested softly. He nodded, their eyes meeting in the firelight. Like home, he agreed. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken things. Then Daniel cleared his throat and stood up. Getting late. Should check on the stock before turning in. Sarah watched him go, clutching the small wooden horse and wondering what might have happened if he had stayed. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, the snow-covered landscape glittering under a perfect blue sky. Sarah woke feeling more contented than she had in months, perhaps years. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue calico, but clean and well-mended, and went to prepare breakfast. She was surprised to find Daniel already in the kitchen, a fire blazing in the stove and coffee brewing. "Merry Christmas," he said, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Thought I'd let you sleep in." "Merry Christmas," Sarah replied, touched by his thoughtfulness. "And thank you." They ate breakfast together, sharing the last of yesterday's cookies with their eggs and bacon. Afterward, Daniel hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "Got something else for you," he said. "It's not much, but…" He placed a small package wrapped in brown paper on the table. Sarah opened it carefully to reveal a small book of poetry, Tennyson's verses, well-worn but obviously cared for. "Daniel," she breathed, opening the cover to see his name written in careful script on the flyleaf. "This is yours. I can't take this." "You said you missed having books to read," he explained. "Been carrying this around for years. Thought you might enjoy it more than I have lately." Sarah was deeply moved by the gift, not just the book itself, but the fact that he had given her something personal, something that mattered to him. "Thank you," she said, blinking back unexpected tears. "I'll treasure it." Impulsively, she reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Daniel looked startled but didn't pull away, his rough fingers curling gently around hers for a brief, electric moment before they both withdrew. "I'm afraid I don't have a proper gift for you," Sarah said, flustered by the contact. "Don't need one. Still, I want to give you something." She thought for a moment, then smiled. "I know, I'll teach you to dance." Daniel looked alarmed. "Don't dance." "Everyone can dance with the right teacher," Sarah insisted, standing and holding out her hand. "Come on. One dance and then I'll release you from all Christmas obligations." Reluctantly, Daniel allowed her to lead him to the cleared space near the parlor fireplace. Sarah positioned his right hand at her waist and took his left in hers. "Now, it's simple. Just follow my count. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. They began awkwardly, Daniel stiff and uncertain, his eyes fixed on their feet. But gradually, he relaxed into the rhythm, his natural grace asserting itself. Sarah found herself acutely aware of his nearness, the solid strength of him, the careful way he held her as if she might break. "See, you're a natural," she said, looking up at him. Their eyes met, and suddenly the simple dance became something else entirely. Daniel's hand tightened slightly at her waist, drawing her imperceptibly closer. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the distance between them seemed to charge with unspoken feelings. For a suspended moment, she thought he might kiss her, wanted him to, despite all the reasons he shouldn't. But then a horse nickered loudly outside, breaking the spell, and Daniel stepped back, releasing her. "Should check on that," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Might be a rider coming in." Sarah nodded, trying to calm her racing heart as he strode to the window, then the door. She heard him conversing with someone outside and moved to the kitchen to put on more coffee, assuming it was a passing traveler seeking brief shelter. When Daniel returned, his expression was grim. "It's the sheriff from Willow Creek, and he's got Thomas with him." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "What do they want? To talk to you?" Daniel's eyes were dark with concern. "You don't have to see them if you don't want to." Sarah squared her shoulders. No, I'll speak with them. This has gone on long enough. Daniel nodded, his respect evident. I'll be right beside you. Sheriff Grayson was a bulky man with a weathered face and impassive eyes. He removed his hat as he entered, revealing thinning gray hair. Beside him, Thomas looked prosperous and aggrieved in his fine coat, his handsome features set in lines of righteous indignation. "Mrs. Wilson," the sheriff said with a nod. "Sorry to disturb your Christmas." "It's Miss Wilson now," Sarah replied firmly. "What brings you to the Stewart Ranch, Sheriff?" Thomas stepped forward. "You know very well why we're here, Sarah. It's time for this foolishness to end. You're my wife, and your place is at home with me." Daniel moved closer to Sarah, his presence solid and reassuring at her side. Thomas's eyes flicked to him with naked dislike. "Still hiding behind your cowboy protector, I see," he sneered. "Mr. Wilson," the sheriff cautioned, "let's keep this civil." He turned to Sarah. "Madam, your husband has filed a formal complaint. He wants you to return to the marital home, which is his legal right." "And if I refuse?" Sarah asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Then he can petition the court to have you declared in contempt," the sheriff explained uncomfortably. "Might even be able to have you remanded to his custody." "She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go," Daniel said quietly, the sheriff sighed. "Mr. Dawson, I understand your concern, but this is a legal matter between husband and wife." "Show him," Sarah said suddenly. All three men looked at her in confusion. "Show him why I left," she clarified, her gaze fixed on Thomas. "Show the sheriff what happens when I'm alone with my husband." Thomas's expression darkened. "I don't know what lies you've been telling, but no lies, Thomas, just the truth you've been so careful to hide." Sarah turned to the sheriff. "My husband beats me, Sheriff Grayson, regularly and severely. That's why I fled in the night, that's why I broke my vows." The sheriff looked uncomfortable but not entirely surprised. "Mrs. Wilson, those are serious allegations. They're not allegations. They're facts." Sarah's voice gained strength. "And I have proof." She crossed to the small desk where Mr. Stewart kept his correspondence and removed a sealed envelope from the drawer. With steady hands, she broke the seal and extracted several sheets of paper, which she handed to the sheriff. "What's this?" he asked, scanning the pages. "My diary," Sarah explained. "Dates, descriptions of each beating, and this." She removed a folded document from the envelope. "A statement from Dr. Reynolds in Copper Springs, who treated my broken wrist in June. He noted his suspicions of abuse in his records." Thomas's face contorted with fury. "You scheming little, careful Wilson," Daniel warned, stepping between them. The sheriff continued reading, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When he looked up, his eyes were hard. "Mr. Wilson, these accusations, if true, are deeply disturbing." "They're the hysterical fantasies of a disobedient wife," Thomas blustered, though a hint of uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Everyone in town knows her character." "What they know is what you told them," Sarah countered. "You made sure the story of my infidelity spread before I could tell anyone the truth. You knew no one would believe a fallen woman over the respectable banker's son." The sheriff turned to Thomas. "Is there any truth to these accusations, Mr. Wilson?" "Of course not." "A husband has the right to discipline his wife, but I never discipline." Daniel's voice was dangerously soft. "Is that what you call breaking a woman's wrist, leaving bruises so bad she couldn't show her face in town for weeks?" Thomas glared at him. "This isn't your concern, Cowboy." "I'm making it my concern." The sheriff held up a hand. "That's enough, both of you," he turned to Sarah. Miss Wilson, I'll be honest with you. The law generally sides with husbands in these matters, but this evidence, especially the doctor's statement, it gives me pause." He looked at Thomas with new suspicion. "Mr. Wilson, I'm not going to force this woman to return with you today. I suggest you consult your lawyer about how to proceed, but I warn you, if these allegations can be substantiated, you might find yourself facing charges rather than regaining a wife." Thomas's face flushed with anger. "You can't be serious. You'd take the word of a—" "Choose your next words very carefully," the sheriff interrupted. I've known your family a long time, Thomas, but that doesn't put you above the law." For a moment, Thomas looked as though he might explode with rage. Then, with visible effort, he controlled himself. "This isn't over," he said, his cold eyes fixed on Sarah. "Not by a long shot." "I believe it is," Daniel said, his hand moving subtly to rest near the gun at his hip. The sheriff noticed the movement and sighed heavily. "Let's go, Wilson. We've disturbed these folks' Christmas long enough." After they had departed, Sarah sank into a chair, suddenly drained of energy. Daniel watched her with concern. "You all right?" She nodded slowly. "I've been keeping that diary since the 2nd month of my marriage. At first, I thought if I documented the pattern, I could show Thomas how his behavior was worsening. Then I realized it might be the only thing that could protect me if I ever found the courage to leave." Daniel knelt beside her chair. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do." Sarah gave him a tremulous smile. "I couldn't have done it without you standing beside me." His eyes held hers. "I'll always stand beside you, Sarah, for as long as you want me there." The depth of feeling in his voice made her heart skip. "Daniel, I know it's not the right time," he said quickly. "You're still legally married, still dealing with all of this. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know you're not alone, not anymore." Sarah reached out, her fingers gently touching his cheek. "Thank you for giving me the strength to fight back." He turned his face slightly, his lips brushing against her palm in a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. Then he stood, clearing his throat. "Better check on the livestock." Storms brewing to the north. Sarah watched him go, her palm still tingling from his touch, her heart fuller than she had thought possible on this strangest of Christmases. The winter progressed with little further incident. Sheriff Grayson rode out once more in January to inform Sarah that Thomas had withdrawn his complaint, apparently unwilling to face the scrutiny that a legal battle would bring to his own behavior. "Doesn't mean he's given up for good," the sheriff warned, "but it buys you time." Mr. Stewart, upon hearing the full story after his return, had been gruffly supportive. "No man worth the name raises his hand to a woman," he declared, and that was the end of the matter as far as he was concerned. Sarah's position at the ranch was secure. Between Sarah and Daniel, things remained in a state of cautious suspension. Their friendship deepened with each passing day, but both were careful to maintain proper boundaries. She was still a married woman, regardless of the circumstances, and Daniel was too honorable to cross that line. Still, there were moments a lingering glance across the dinner table, fingers brushing as he handed her a stack of plates, the way he always seemed to know when she needed quiet support or gentle encouragement. They were building something precious, brick by careful brick. Though neither could yet name what it might become, by March, the first signs of spring began to appear. The snow receded, revealing patches of mud and tentative green growth. Ranch operations picked up as Mr. Stewart prepared for the busy seasons ahead. 2 new hands were hired, and the Miller brothers returned from their winter employment elsewhere. One bright afternoon, as Sarah hung laundry in the fresh breeze, she was startled by the approach of a buggy she didn't recognize. A woman sat at the reins, elegantly dressed, with silver-streaked dark hair tucked beneath a fashionable bonnet. "Good afternoon," the stranger called as she drew the buggy to a stop. "Would you be Miss Wilson?" Sarah nodded cautiously, uncertain what to expect. The woman smiled warmly. "I'm Eleanor Blackwell, attorney at law from Denver. I believe we have matters to discuss." Stunned, Sarah invited the woman inside. Mrs. Blackwell, one of the few female lawyers in the territory, explained that she had been engaged by a women's aid society to assist in cases like Sarah's. "Sheriff Grayson's wife is a member of our society," she explained. "When she heard of your situation, she contacted me directly." "I don't understand," Sarah said, bewildered. "What exactly are you offering?" "A divorce, Miss Wilson," Mrs. Blackwell said simply. "On grounds of cruelty and abandonment." Sarah's breath caught. "Is that possible?" "I thought it's not easy," the lawyer acknowledged. "But with your evidence and the doctor's statement, we have a strong case. And your husband, I'm told, may be amenable to an uncontested divorce if certain conditions are met. What conditions? A complete silence on your part regarding his behavior, and you would need to relinquish any claim to marital property. Sarah laughed bitterly. I left with nothing but the clothes on my back. I have no interest in his property. Then we may be able to proceed quite expeditiously, Mrs. Blackwell said with satisfaction. I've already drawn up preliminary papers. If you're willing, we could begin immediately. That evening, after Mrs. Blackwell had departed with signed documents in her valise, Sarah sought out Daniel. She found him by the corral, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. Beautiful evening, she said, coming to stand beside him. He nodded, glancing at her with a soft smile. Everything all right, saw you had a visitor. A lawyer, Sarah confirmed. She's helping me file for divorce. Daniel turned to face her fully, hope and caution warring in his expression. That's good news, the best news, Sarah affirmed. It may take some time to finalize, but Mrs. Blackwell believes it will be granted, especially if Thomas doesn't contest it. And you think he won't, Sarah shrugged. He cares more about his reputation than he ever did about me. A quiet divorce protects his name better than a public battle would. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the last rays of sunlight slipped behind the mountains. Daniel, Sarah said finally, when this is over, when I'm truly free. He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the fading light. Yes, what happens then, between us? Daniel's face softened. Whatever you want to happen, Sarah, I'm not going anywhere. And if what I want is you, she asked quietly. If I want to see if what's growing between us could be something real, something lasting. He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and took her hand in his. Then I'd be the happiest man in Colorado territory. Sarah's heart felt too full for her chest. We'll have to be patient a while longer. I've gotten good at patience these past months, Daniel said with a smile. You're worth waiting for. The divorce proceedings moved forward with surprising speed, thanks to Mrs. Blackwell's efficiency and Thomas's apparent desire to put the matter behind him. By late April, Sarah received word that the court had granted her petition. She was free legally and completely free for the first time since her hasty wedding nearly 2 years before. That evening, the entire ranch celebrated with her. Mr. Stewart opened a bottle of fine whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion, and even the usually taciturn ranch hands offered congratulations and good wishes. Later, as the celebration wound down, Daniel found Sarah sitting alone on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. Mind if I join you? He asked. She smiled and patted the space beside her. I was hoping you would. He settled next to her, close but not touching. How does it feel? Being free, strange, she admitted. Wonderful and terrifying all at once. For so long I've been defined by what I was running from. Now I have to decide what I'm running toward. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Any ideas about that? Sarah turned to look at him, taking in the strong profile she had come to know so well, the straight nose, the firm jaw, the eyes that always saw through to the heart of her. A few, she said softly. Daniel met her gaze, his own full of promise. Sarah, he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, I'm not a wealthy man. Don't have much besides my horse, my saddle, and what I've saved working for Stewart. But I've been thinking of buying a small spread of my own. There's good land opening up south of here. Sarah's heart quickened. Is that so? It is. He took her hand gently in his. It wouldn't be much at first, hard work, simple living, but it could grow into something fine with time and care. He paused. It would be a damn sight finer with you there. Daniel Dawson, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you asking me to marry you? I am, he confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. Not right away, when you're ready. If you're ever ready, I just want you to know that's where my heart is. Sarah didn't hesitate. She leaned forward and kissed him their first kiss, sweet and full of promise. When she pulled back, she was smiling through tears. Yes, she said simply. His face broke into a grin of such pure joy that it took her breath away. Then he was kissing her again, his arms wrapping around her as if he never intended to let go. They were married that June in a simple ceremony at the Stewart Ranch. Mr. Stewart gave the bride away, the Miller brothers served as witnesses, and Mrs. Gardner came from town with a beautiful cake. Even Sheriff Grayson and his wife attended, their presence a public acknowledgement of Sarah's standing in the community. By September, Daniel and Sarah had moved to their own small ranch 20 miles south of Willow Creek. The land was good, with a clear creek running through it and enough grazing for the modest herd Daniel had started. The cabin was simple but solid, and Sarah filled it with warmth and touches of beauty. On a golden autumn evening, much like the one when she had first arrived in Willow Creek over a year before, Sarah stood on their porch watching Daniel work with a young colt in the corral. His movements were patient, gentle but firm, earning the animal's trust with consistent kindness. Her hand drifted to her stomach, where the first subtle swelling had begun to show. She hadn't told him yet, wanting to be certain before sharing the news that would change their lives once more. As if sensing her thoughts, Daniel looked up and caught her watching him. His face broke into a smile that still made her heart skip, and he secured the colt before making his way to the porch. "What's that look for?" he asked, climbing the steps to stand before her. Sarah took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "I have something to tell you." Daniel's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Sarah, are you?" She nodded, her eyes shining. "Come spring, there will be 3 of us on this ranch." The joy that transformed his face was everything she had hoped for. Daniel gathered her carefully into his arms as if she had suddenly become fragile, precious crystal. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," Sarah replied, her heart full to overflowing. "My quiet cowboy who said nothing, but stayed beside me when the whole world turned away." As the sun set over their land, their future Sarah Wilson Dawson knew she had finally found her true home, not in a place but in the arms of a man who had believed in her when she had stopped believing in herself. In the years that followed, the Dawson Ranch prospered and grew. Their first child, a son named James, was joined by a daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years later. The community that had once shunned Sarah came to respect the hard-working family, and eventually the old gossip faded into distant memory. Sometimes visitors who didn't know their history would remark on what a perfect match. They seemed the quiet, steadfast rancher and his warm, intelligent wife. Sarah would just smile and squeeze Daniel's hand, knowing that their love had been forged in the hardest of circumstances and was all the stronger for it. And on summer evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work done, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they had built together, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought a shamed woman and a solitary cowboy to find in each other the redemption they never knew they sought.